Welcome back to the Stati's podcast, once more into the breach. This is episode 3. This time we're going to be looking at decrypting zero trust, separating fact from fiction in data security, featuring Paul German, CEO, and Simon Pamplin, CTO of Certes. Paul, it's been mentioned certainly on your website that you're in this kind of high assurance landscape. Take us through what that means.
Okay, so assurance has many meanings, certainly when it comes to the technology space. When we're talking about data and data assurance, what we're talking about is building structure around how our data is to be protected, so that what we can do is we can provide a level of assurance back to the organization that the data is being handled according to business intent. So it's around building intent-based policies dictating how our data is to be protected. So what it does is really using the term assurance or data assurance, it gives us the ability to then track that, let's say using a sort of a red, amber, green type outcome internally. So from a data protection officer perspective, chief risk officer, or just from a purely business perspective, what we can do is we can easily say, where are we in terms of our data assurance? Are we running green in terms of we're confident that we have the right level of control over the way our data is handled? Amber or yellow, do we have any areas of risk that we're potentially carrying that, whilst need to be addressed, are not damaging to the organization if the risk was to turn into reality? Or red, is there something that is hugely risky to the business right now and something that needs immediate attention? So, when we talk about data assurance within an organization, that's why we use that term, because it's a way of quickly ascertaining exactly where are we in terms of our data security posture.
Coming over to you now, Simon. Simon, let's talk about zero trust. What does it really mean? And what are you seeing there in this landscape of certainly potential customers?
Yeah, I'm smiling because, what does zero trust mean? As you said, there's many, many vendors out there that say we have a zero trust solution, or our VPN is zero trust, or our solution is zero trust in its approach. You kind of get to the approach where zero trust doesn't actually mean zero trust. So if you as a customer are buying a solution from vendor A that say is their zero trust solution, what you're actually doing is trusting them. It's not zero trust. It's not true zero trust. It's a trust me or a trust them approach, because you, the customer, are still absolving yourself from that responsibility of what and who you trust by handing it over to another vendor. Now, our approach in Certes is that the only person you should trust in respects to looking after your data is yourself. The customer should be the only one in control of that data, not a vendor, not an as a service, managed service provider, or anything else like that. So the Certes solution hands over to the customer the control of that data protection, so that only they have access to the keys that protect the data. Only they can determine who should see that information. So the true zero trust, well, I'd say true zero trust is any solution that only the customer is in control of, not a vendor, not a service provider.
So have you met businesses then that believe they have zero trust, but they haven't got zero trust at all? And why is that?
Absolutely. Pretty much everybody that's bought any solution in the last couple of years will have bought something that is zero trust. And don't get me wrong, the zero trust that we're talking about that the vendors are promoting is typically device infrastructure, physical connectivity to the network. That's their version of zero trust. But that zero trust authenticates devices and connections and locations. It doesn't protect the data. So again, if you come back to this concept of the business is responsible and liable in the event of a data breach, having confirmed that laptop A is allowed to connect to network B really doesn't prevent you from being fined or having reputational damage by the regulators when you get a network breach. So the whole zero trust concept is kind of focused in the wrong direction. It's focused on something that, yes, you need to prevent just anybody joining your network. And zero trust, as it's sold today, typically does do a decent job of doing that. But it still doesn't protect the thing the business is going to be hit with if they lose, and that's the data. That's where you really need to put all of the control around that data in the hands of the customer, who is the data controller, the data owner. And that's really where we come at this. You've got to focus on the data more than just the infrastructure, because that's where the penalties stem from.
So cleverly worded there, and I'm picking up that you're basically offering your customer trust then, because they can trust then their own solution through you. You're handing them control over their own reins. This has got to be reassuring, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about the early days of doing, say, banking over the internet, the amount of people that were very, very nervous about doing that, they didn't want to expose their financial, personal information to this scary thing called the internet. And yet everybody today does it without thinking. They'll do it on their phone, their laptop, they'll do it from a Starbucks or any other coffee shop, etc. And they really don't think about it anymore. But it's that concept of we're sending lots and lots of personal data over the internet. And I'd say the early days where people were skeptical and concerned about putting their data over the internet is a position we've kind of lost. And we really need to get that position back, because you should be skeptical. You should be worried about putting personal data over unsecured networks if there's no protection around your data. I mean, do you really want to go and put on a public forum your passport information, your credit card information? If you're not protecting the data, you're trusting that someone else in that journey of that network and all of the different segments of that network that your data travels over is protecting your data as well as you would wish it was protected. Whereas if you focus on protecting that data day one before it gets onto those networks, then you don't have to worry about it. Your data is sovereign to you, only you can access it, or your intended recipient. Doesn't matter what network it goes over, doesn't matter if somebody even steals it, as they almost inevitably will do. That data that they steal is worthless to them and valueless, and they'll go and find a softer target.
I haven't been into a bank in years. In fact, I think the last time I had to go into a bank was to do something quite unusual. And I remember thinking, go in, like walk into the bank. How times have changed, right?
Yeah, it's quite dramatic the way that we've become neutral in our concerns about who can actually see my data. When I send stuff in an email, if someone says, can you just send me your passport information when I'm booking tickets with an airline? That's most of the information they need to duplicate your identity. People don't think about that until it's too late. We're trying to prevent that from actually happening in the first place, rather than trying to mop up after the case, which is traditionally what most cybersecurity tends to do. It's reactive, its approach. We need to be proactive. We need to go, as one of my American colleagues said, we've got to go on the offensive around data protection. We have to assume we're going to be attacked, and we have to plan accordingly. And the way you do that is you protect the data before it goes out from your control.
Right, let's hear Paul's views on this. Paul, zero trust. I mean, you're a CEO, so it means something quite different to you in your position as well. But what do you have to say about zero trust?
Yeah, I think zero trust is a concept that has millions of dollars of marketing attached to it, and we're trying to drive a narrative as an industry that ties zero trust to a set of vendor capabilities, where those vendors are infrastructure-based vendors themselves. So it really contradicts the whole concept around, for me, contradicts the whole concept around zero trust, because what we're trying to do with zero trust is say, in short, that basically as an organization, from a security perspective, I have no inherent trust of the infrastructure over which my data is traversing. Now, what that means is that from a policy perspective, I shouldn't have to program the underlying infrastructure at all to be able to protect my data. But in short, that's exactly what we are seeing from today's zero trust capabilities that are being delivered by other vendors in the market. Now, like going back to some of the points that we've already made, infrastructure security is an absolute must. But however, I think that it's a stretch for an infrastructure vendor to even talk zero trust, when what they're really saying is trust me and don't trust anybody else. So it's more of a single trust type approach, because you have to trust them because you're driving policy into their infrastructure that they're selling you, whether that's as a service or whether it's as hardware, software combination. The approach that Certes takes, however, from the very outset, we always knew that trust was of utmost importance when it came to delivering a solution to our customers. So we very much took the approach of decoupling the trust from our technology and being able to firmly put, and us as a business, and being able to firmly put that trust in the hands of the customer, so that they understood that they could trust, they could have a, Gartner call it a reduced scope of trust. They could have a small group of individuals or capabilities within their environment whom they could trust, but that didn't expand outside of those who should have trust. So what that meant was, and there was no inherent trust of either an infrastructure team within the organization itself, a service provider delivering services, a cloud provider delivering cloud type services. It was something where only those that should have trust do have trust. Now, what that means is that we as a vendor had to then say, well, as a vendor, we've got intrinsic knowledge of how Certes as a solution works. So we actually build capabilities in there into the offering, so that even as a vendor, when our products are deployed according to the best practices that our engineering teams and product teams develop, then even Certes doesn't have the ability to have access to customers' data. The customers, the owner of the data, they are the only ones that have access to that data. So for me, that is the true concept of zero trust, where a vendor actually puts their hands up, acknowledges that in certain scenarios, there may be, they're in a position of trust. What we've done is we've looked at all of those scenarios and have firmly removed Certes from any position of trust within our customers' deployments, within our customers' processes and procedures. So again, what I believe truly delivering on that concept of zero trust, where our customers have zero trust of anything, whether they're vendors, infrastructure providers, service providers, cloud providers. They have zero trust of anything other than what they have control of, and they have control around the team, the data protection team, the risk team within their organization that has ownership and control of those policies and keys protecting their sensitive or regulated data.
Yeah, I really like the way you've described that. And how would you determine the difference, the delta between single trust and zero trust?
It's really about, if it's single trust from an infrastructure perspective, if I'm a vendor and let's say a customer is using my technology and I get access to that device, I can see the configuration of that device. And part of that configuration is I get access to policies and keys that are protecting that data. Then obviously there's an element of trust needed within my organization and the support organization in order to be able to provide the relevant level of service and support to that customer. What Certes does is we understand that that's potentially an issue. We do not want access. We do not want visibility of a customer's data. So we've introduced capabilities within our products that enable us to offer those support services without getting that access to that customer data. So in short, we are true zero trust infrastructure solutions, or what we would call single trust. And to go one step further, Yo-Yo, we've got instances now of certain major vendors in the industry delivering what are being pitched as zero trust services. And they're talking about customers sending them their data, having cloud capabilities where data traverses a cloud. And within that cloud, there's a number of security capabilities that cloud provider provides to that customer as a service, as a cloud delivered service. Now, one of those services that's used is SSL inspection. Now, SSL inspection is really just a man in the middle attack, right? The service provider actively decrypts data that's been protected by the customer for the purposes of looking at that data to see whether there's any vulnerabilities in there. Now, I'm not going to say whether that's right or wrong, but what I'm going to say is that from a data security perspective, what that end customer is doing, the owner of that data, is then actually bringing that service provider into that risk chain. And we've seen with a number of regulations that there are now third-party flow down elements to contracts where regulators will include service providers within that risk chain, as I say, that risk environment, when evaluating a customer's or a data owner's approach to securing their data. So it's not just about how it's secured within their environment, but how it's protected within third-party providers' environments as well. And service providers are walking into this unknowingly, it seems, because they're delivering all of these services where actually they become what's called a data processor. So regulators now have the ability to, in the event that there's a data breach, they go after the data owner or the data controller. But also what they can then do is go after the service providers as data processors, because even, and this was something that we learned a while back through one of our partners that we're working with, the legal aspects of regulation and how regulators are enforcing the laws of regulation. Service providers, even if they choose not to look at data, the very fact that they have access to data in its unprotected form makes them a data processor. And at that point, they have certain requirements around handling that sensitive data in a fashion that adheres to the regulations. So we're now in a position where service providers are delivering services. And remember, some of these vendors are delivering as a service. And what they're doing is they're walking into a position where they are becoming liable, responsible for customer sensitive data. And what that means is that from a regulatory perspective, they're accumulating risk. And when we start to see the size and scale of fines, we're in a position where service providers are actually accumulating risk at a faster rate that than they're accumulating revenue. And obviously, with the new laws that are coming out around publishing of financial data, including risk for public organizations, it means that as a C level within one of these organizations, we need to understand that risk is accumulating to be able to adequately state on our financial statements exactly what risk we're carrying. So that's why it's really important for us to understand what risk are we carrying, how do we quantify it, and what impact is that having to our businesses? And more importantly, how are we using capabilities in order to mitigate that risk so that risk doesn't become realized one day?
Right, Simon, I want to come to you, please, to hear your views around zero trust.
I think we've covered quite a lot around zero trust and the fact that it tends to be the vendor's perception of what zero trust should be rather than the business. And they have two very opposing views. I mean, the vendor is there trying to make sure that nobody other than the people that their solution controls connects to a network. It's a connectivity approach. Whereas the business is probably looking at this as nobody can have access to my information. And the two things really don't mean the same in the IT world. So when we look at zero trust as it's sold to customers today, it's that trust me or trust them, trust a vendor rather than don't trust anyone as it should be. So we're still of the opinion that the only person that should be in control of an organization's data that they're in charge of is them themselves. So zero trust for us should mean that only the customer has control of that data and the policies that determine who has access to the data, irrespective of the service that they're deploying, the vendor that they choose to go with. Zero trust should be a customer owned and controlled concept.
The stance of CERTI is that you reduce your own risk, don't you, by making sure that zero trust exists on your side. That's got to benefit every customer, hasn't it? To know that's the stance that you're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. As CERTI as a vendor selling a solution, we're different in as much as we determine that the customer is the one that's in control of this data. We do not want access or visibility of the data in any way, shape, or form. So the whole way that our solution protects the data has components that only the customer can create and deploy. So even though CERTIs is selling the solution to the customer, CERTIs themselves have absolutely no way to see that data for its entire life. That means that the customer, and by association, the customer's own customers, their data is protected, it's secure, and none of the vendors in the entire chain of events on any of the infrastructure, cloud, or anything else can see that data if the customer or the organization that's charged with protecting that data has allowed that to happen through policy.
Yeah, interesting. I was thinking about the post office scandal when I was hearing about who really genuinely does have access to data. So it's really, really reassuring. Paul, let's look at the benefits to CERTIs for zero trust or any other managed service provider.
Yeah, really good question, because we talk about the benefits of technology to our partners through the way that CERTIs deliver zero trust, but also it has massive benefits for us as an organization because we do not want access to our customers' data. And because of the way we've developed our technology, it puts us in a position where only our customers have access to their sensitive data. So from a regulatory perspective, we're putting ourselves as certes in the best position possible to be protected against any legal or litigation risk from data non-conformance or non-compliance. So again, whilst it's really very important to our end customers, it also has massive benefits to us as an organization because we understand the risks around holding, carrying, transmitting sensitive data. And we actually use ourselves as an example when we're talking to our service provider customers, our complementary vendor offerings, to be able to encourage our partners to take the same stance, which is, access to customer data is an absolute no-no. And the only way to do that is to put them in control of the policies and keys protecting their sensitive data. That way, even though we see the data packets, we don't see any sensitive data. And from a data regulation perspective, we're in the clear.
So we've discussed this episode around zero trust or single trust. What is the delta between the two? And is there really single trust and zero trust? And what is it really? And how does it affect you and the relationship with your MSP? Simon, what can I say? Thank you so much for joining us on this subject today.
Thank you for giving us the time on your platform there, Yo-Yo. Yeah, zero trust. I'd encourage customers to really sit back and think about this, not take zero trust on face value. Ask yourself, I deploy a vendor's zero trust solution. Well, who still has access to my data? Is it just me as the customer? Or does the vendor whose solution I've just put in place under the guise of zero trust still have access to my data? That's not true zero trust. True zero trust is where the customer is the only person in control of their data.
The best place to be, I think. Thank you, Simon. Paul, zero trust. We couldn't cover any more. We went into a lot of depth. Thank you so much for your expertise on this subject.
Yeah, thanks for having us on the platform, Yo-Yo. Zero trust, it's a very broad topic today. I think zero trust means many things to many people, but I would encourage the listeners to truly read up about zero trust. Try and understand, what does it mean to you? Don't have the narrative driven by a service provider or a vendor. Understand what it truly means to you, because I think it gets malaligned sometimes in favor of either vendors or services providing either technology or services. So make sure that you understand what your requirements are around zero trust. And in short, that means limiting access to your sensitive data to something that you control. And that means the data protection team, the risk team within your organization, are the ones that should be driving ownership and policy around how your sensitive data is protected.
There you have it, the end of another episode. Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you, Paul. You've just listened to a podcast talking about decrypting zero trust, separating fact from fiction in data security. Next time, episode 4 is going to take a look at who foots the bill for a data breach. See you then.